Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Jay's Fit Down Podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and I'm here today with Aaron Freeman. He's the host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, and we're glad to have him on to kind of recap the Falcons game against the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football, which they came out victorious in, and also previewing the Carolina Panthers coming up on Sunday. So thank you, Aaron, for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad we get to do this now as opposed to last week. So we're coming off a win. So things are looking good. Love talking ball with you, Jay.
Yeah, man. Yeah, definitely. I'd say everything aligned up how it's supposed to, right? We're recapping a win instead of a loss. So, like you said, but so yeah. Speaking of that win, Falcons go to Minnesota, which is, as we know, and feels like the Falcons have gone to Minnesota like the last 2 or 3 years. I'm like, when are they going to come down here? I think they came down here the year before last to play us when Josh Dobbs was the quarterback.
Yeah.
Um, and we lost that game. And we lost last year too up there, but we go up there again and get the win. So, tough place to play. And the Falcons were able to go in there and take care of business. So, what did you see from Atlanta out of that game, good and bad?
Yeah, I think the two main things that you saw good were the run game. They dominated the game on the ground, rushing for 218 yards in that game. You saw Bijan Robinson look like the superstar that we know he's capable of being after a very quiet week one, where the Falcons' run game basically got shut down by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They kind of got pushed around in the trenches, and the Falcons were kind of able to kind of flip the script against the Vikings, assert their will on the ground. My expectation going into that Vikings game was that they would have a rebound run game, but I wasn't necessarily expecting them to dominate the game as well as much as they did in that manner. So that was definitely a refreshing sort of positive to take away from it. And then the other thing was the pass rush and the defense really kind of shutting down that Vikings offense. You knew with JJ McCarthy making his second NFL career start that it was going to be probably an up and down game for the Vikings offense. And you saw that in their first game against the Bears, where they were kind of struggling for 3 quarters, and then that offense kind of came alive in the fourth quarter, and you were kind of nervous, or at least I was. I can't speak for everybody else,
Yeah.
but you were kind of nervous that given kind of the slow start, even though the Falcons were moving the ball pretty effectively between the 20s, they were kind of stalling offensively in the red zone, constantly settling for field goals. And you were kind of worried, okay, is this going to come back to bite them in the butt because the Vikings offense is just going to be able to put together like two good drives at the end of the game to kind of win the game and have the Falcons, clearly dominating the game for 80% of the game and then just like lose it in the last 20%. We've never known the Falcons to blow a lead or anything like that.
Yeah. Never.
And so, it was a concern, but the defense, started strong, finished strong, and it was really spearheaded by that pass rush, getting 6 sacks, five in the first half. The stat that came out was the Falcons hadn't had that many sacks in one half of football since 2009. And for a team that has historically struggled when it comes to getting the quarterback on the ground. It was very refreshing to sort of see them be able to do that to the degree that they were able to do that. You also saw the rookies playing well. And then sort of the last thing that was a positive to take away from the game was the special teams that really struggled in that week one game. The kicking game was a concern. It wasn't a concern. You had 5 field goals, in that game for John Parker Romo, who was replacing Younghoe Koo. And it looks like the Falcons have their new kicker, but we'll sort of have to see how that goes. So, you had a three-phase win for the Falcons. The only real negative from the game was the aforementioned red zone issues where the Falcons right now have not been that successful once they get down into that area of the field. But other than that, like it was a pretty complete performance for the Falcons in prime time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, put up 22 points. Of course, most of them were field goals, like you mentioned. And shout out to John Parker Romo for coming in there and hitting them. And one other thing I wanted to notice in that game was, the trouble getting the play calls in. I think that was something they figured it out later on as the game went on, but early got in the red zone. I'm sure you saw like Michael Penix was like, "Hey, come on!" Like, the play clock was going down, and they were struggling to get the plays in. And so I think moving forward, yeah, I think, him and Zach Robinson have got to get on a better page with each other, especially playing in stadiums like that where the crowd is going to be loud. You're going to have to get that play calling faster because you can't be calling the plays, man. It's 10 seconds left on the play clock, and the Falcons use a lot of motion, so that it's like I'm sure you saw that as well. So um, yeah, but I mean overall, I mean, would you agree that Zach Robinson's play calling, what is your take on that this year, second year OC so far through the season?
Yeah, I mean, I was very critical of Zach Robinson's play calling in his first year. I think everybody else kind of gave him a pass, and now lots of other people are being critical of it, and I think it's deserving criticism. I'm kind of at this point where I'm willing to give him a couple more games to kind of see like, is this what he is, the play caller that I thought he was, which was, competent but limited from year one. And I think that's continued into year two. There have been attempts at growth and development and diversifying the run game and trying to dial up the play action. It's just you haven't really seen the Falcons execute those things. And as you noted earlier, it did feel like the what's the word? I can't think of the word, but the whole trying to get the feels like it's a P word, but I can't think of the word. But the getting the plays in,
Yeah.
was such a struggle early in this game. I think in large part due to the crowd noise, and this offense continues to be a work in progress. We'll see if they get to a point, hopefully soon, where it looks like a well-oiled machine. They're not there yet. It took about week 5 last year with Kirk Cousins at the helm before they started to look that way, and then they looked that way for like a month and then they stopped looking that way. And
Yeah.
so hopefully they will get, instead of 1 month or 6 weeks or whatever it was of high level offensive play, they'll get 15 weeks of that, now that 2 games have been played, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. And so that's kind of my thoughts on Zach Robinson. It's kind of a wait and see. I already had kind of a low opinion of him. It hasn't really moved up or down. It's just kind of like, okay, he's okay, we'll see if he's good or better. But he's just been okay so far.
Yeah, the big talk was when he got hired, of course, last offseason, it was like he's coming from that Sean McVay tree with the Rams, right? I believe he was the quarterbacks coach with the Rams, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
before he arrived here. And it's like we're gonna implement all that type of stuff, and it's like you hear Sean McVay and then your eyes pop up, right? But it's just now clearly the talent, while the Falcons are talented offensively, is a different type of talent than the Rams have. So that's something to factor into, and different quarterback play. But I think moving forward, like you said, the offense should improve. Just the red zone, you like to see them punching in, man. You get down there, it's like running the same play over and over again. It's not working. Like, I don't know, man. Stuff like that just makes me question Zach Robinson sometimes. Um, but I mean, well, on a positive note, the defense looks great. Like you said, 6 sacks. I mean, and the rookies, Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr. in their first sacks. The pressure looked like it was there pretty much all night. So talking about from the defense side, man, like what did you like from the guys specifically, on defense?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is the pressure. The secondary thing is the secondary, creating turnovers. That was kind of one of the main selling points of this draft class, the Falcons investing 2 first-round picks and edge rushers to try to hopefully solve that problem. And you got to see both of those guys, and James Pierce and Jalen Walker, get their first sacks of their NFL careers on Sunday Night Football. So they're off to a good start. So far this year, and the pass rush, has been one of the best pass rushes in the NFL, which is a crazy thing to say about Atlanta Falcons pass rush.
Yeah.
And then kind of the other selling point was, they drafted Xavier Watts, the safety, in the third round, and Billy Bowman, their nickel DB, in the fourth round. And both of those guys were ball hawking playmakers in college. And so it was the idea of, we're going to be able to get pressure up front. We're going to be able to turn teams over with Jesse Bates and others in the secondary. And you got to see that on Sunday night. So the vision of this Falcons defense was pretty much exactly what, they promised and delivered on Sunday night against the Vikings. The only real knock on the defense, and it hasn't really been too big a concern at this point, is they have been a little susceptible to the run. It's not anything crazy or anything like that. Like, I don't think, giving up 218 yards rushing like the Vikings did is likely in the cards, but
No,
you
yeah.
know, I do think there are going to be teams later this season that will try to be a little bit more committed to running the football. And that's going to be the one sort of unanswered question for this defense. Will they be able to hold up in a game where a opposing team is really committed to running the football? Minnesota wasn't in this game. Tampa Bay wasn't in that first game. And so that's going to be the challenge for this defense. But otherwise, again, it's a lot of promises have been delivered so far.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. I agree 100%, and I think that moving forward, yeah, we're gonna play some offenses, yeah, who will like to be physical and run the football. The Buffalo Bills being one of them. They're coming up here in a couple weeks, less than a month, so that'll be interesting. But for right now, we're gonna be focusing on the Carolina Panthers on Sunday. So, you know, we know the deal with Carolina. These games can kind of, it's a divisional game, so it can go either way. I feel like over the last couple of years, we've been a little bit, what's the word? Now I'm, you lost your word. Now I'm losing my word. With Carolina, I feel like we could have been much more imposing than we have been. Like especially the way they were last year, we should have blown them out both times. Um, but. You know. We didn't. So, what's gonna be keys for the Falcons to getting this win here against a Carolina Panthers team that hasn't started the year off that well? All right, but not that well. They're 0-2. So,
Yeah, I think the biggest change in the positive for Carolina this year has been their defense. It looks competent when it was historically bad last year.
yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't call it a good defense, but it's a functional NFL defense. If they gave up 200 yards rushing against the Jaguars, but a lot of that came on a couple of big explosive runs that they gave up in that game. Um, but for the most part, I do think this Carolina defense is, getting to a level where it should be competent. And I'll be curious to see if this is kind of the get right game for the Atlanta Falcons offense. I don't think Carolina's the pushover that they were a year ago defensively, and so they can present some challenges for the Falcons offense if this offense and the play calling and the red zone and all that stuff is not on point this week. And then I think the other issue is offensively, they have not gotten off to the best start. They finished last year strong,
Mhm.
obviously, scoring a lot of points against the Atlanta Falcons in
Yeah.
a Week 18 game. And they were hoping that would carry over into this year. That hasn't quite done that. But I do think they can present some challenges. They are the type of team that I think would love to run the football. I think that will be a issue for them just because they're down now two of their starting offensive linemen in center Austin Corbett and right guard Robert Hunt, who are integral to their rushing success. And so I think that will be a challenge for them, but they'll probably try to see if they can run the football. I think Teterow McMillan, their rookie wide receiver, the first round pick, has looked really good in the first two games. You maybe look at the numbers and you may not be that impressed by them, but he's been a guy that's consistently gotten open, made some really highlight reel grabs in these two games against Jacksonville and Arizona. And so I think he'll be a challenge for the Falcons, especially assuming AJ Terrell is not going to be in the lineup, the Falcons' top corner. They haven't officially ruled him out this week, but the rhetoric coming out of Raheem Morris on Wednesday strongly suggests that he's not going to play this weekend. And even if he did play, the one thing that AJ Terrell has historically struggled against is bigger physical wide receivers. Now he had a great week one against Mike Evans, one of the better games he's had against Mike Evans in his career. So maybe that was going to change. But a guy like T Mac, Teterow McMillan could have really given him challenges. And now without AJ Terrell, who's by far your best cornerback, I think he'll give challenges for everybody else in the secondary. And so that's going to be a challenge. So, you know, so far the Falcons have not, defensively not been the typical Falcons defense, which is like, oh, if you're struggling, if you're in a slump, you can have your get right game against the Falcons so far this year. Hopefully that trend will, or
Yeah.
hopefully that trend won't stop so that they will continue to play high level defense and that Carolina won't suddenly look like they did in week 18 and suddenly, Tedero McMillan goes off for like 12 catches and 155 yards or some ridiculous thing in this matchup. But I think those are going to be some of the challenges. I do expect this to be a typical divisional game where it's a competitive game for all four quarters. Obviously, I would love to see the Falcons do what you suggested, Jay, and blow them out like they probably should have done both times last year. But we know that that's typically not the way that these games tend to go. So I'm
No.
I'm expecting a competitive four-quarter game, and I will be absolutely pleasantly surprised if this winds up being like a 38-10 blowout.
Yeah, very surprised. I would be very surprised as well. But yeah, like you said, it's going to be interesting seeing how Terrell McMillan matches up against the secondary. From what you're saying, it seems like AJ Terrell could be out this week. From what you're hearing, okay.
Yeah, I'm not expecting personally. Again, it's hard to glean information from Raheem Morris when it comes to injuries. He'll say he basically said he's week to week, which could mean he misses a game. It could mean he misses 6 weeks. You just don't really know. But just kind of, I'm getting better at reading between the lines of Raheem's coach speak and trying to read between the lines. I don't expect him to play. I'm currently not really expecting him to play between now and the bye week, which is week 5 for the Falcons. So he may miss the next couple of games. I think that will be a challenge for this team this week against Carolina, but I think that will be a bigger challenge against them in Washington in week 4. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I'm not expecting AJ Terrell to play, but obviously, there's a possibility that we could get some good news on Friday and say, oh, he's a game time decision or he's probable or something like that. But I'm not currently expecting that based off of what I've heard so far.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that update on AJ Terrell. So it looks like we're gonna have to lean on the offer and Billy Bowman. I'm sure we'll see more action as well, depending on how they package the defense in certain situations. But they played well. The secondary has been I think that number two cornerback spot is what we've been wondering about in the offseason, how that will look opposite of Terrell. And so far, it's been okay. I mean, Justin Jefferson had like what, one catch, I believe one or two against us on Sunday night. So granted, JJ McCarthy, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's still a good reps. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, man, I'm interested to look see how they look against a divisional opponent, another divisional opponent early on this season. So it should be an interesting game. Yeah, but Aaron, thank you again for joining us here on the podcast today. We appreciate your time. And we'll look to have you back on here pretty soon. So hopefully it'll be again discussing a Falcons win.
Look forward
Um,
to it.
yeah, but yeah, thank you, Aaron. We appreciate it. Make sure y'all check him out on Locked On Falcons. Does a great job there covering the team, and everything like that. So, and make sure you check us out here on YouTube and all that good stuff. And we will see you next time. Thank you, Aaron.